Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
That is what we do here. We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week. What have you brought to the table today?
Well, as introduced last week, white property, black trespass. We didn't get a chance to finish that fully in time for when we normally record, and so we're gonna switch it up a little bit. We'll talk about that book and all of its greatness next week. I'll talk more about it a little bit at the end of this episode again, just to introduce it again.
Yep.
But we're gonna revisit the activity/game that we have here from the which is on racism. So it's a bunch of questions about race and racism and anti-racism. And so we're going to go back and forth and ask each other a couple of questions from that game. There's 199 questions here.
Yes.
And we've chosen 2 each. And I'm really questioning, now that I'm looking at my 2 again, whether or not I've asked you this one already before, which would be really wild since there's 199.
Yeah.
This is the 3rd time we've done it. So theoretically, there should be many, many more.
Right.
Can I tell you? Very familiar.
Can I tell you what I'm struggling with? Is I totally forgot that there was a thing where I'm asking you these questions and you're asking me your questions. Because I was like, I want to answer these questions.
Oh, okay.
But you know what? We're going to go with it.
Do you want to switch?
No. Let's do it.
Okay.
So you start us off and ask me a question.
I will ask the question. What do you think people are so scared of?
That's the question.
Yeah. What do you think people are so scared of?
That's big.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Everything. I think people are scared of everything. No, let's get serious. What are people scared of? I mean, I think when I think about some of the things that we talk about here in this podcast, if that's sort of the lens we want to go in, I think people are really scared of what the future could look like. And I think about, all of our conversations about abolition and, our fervent belief in abolition and that being the only way forward. But what's on the other side of abolition, I think, is a scary concept for folks, right? Yeah. What does it mean for something to go wrong, or something to be dangerous, or something to occur, some emergency to happen, and you not be able to call the police? Yeah. And that, given that that's so ingrained in our society and in all of us as sort of the first action that we take in an emergency situation is to call 911 and to involve the police in a situation. Our hope for abolition is that we have something different. And I think that's a scary concept for folks, especially folks who aren't fully on board with abolition. And what does it mean for us to hold each other accountable and us to maybe employ restorative justice as a practice, when situations are tough, So, I think we've still got a long way to go to get people on board and to get us to the place where we want to be. But I've also been so inspired by a lot of the media we've taken in on this podcast and a lot of the places where communities are employing abolitionist practices, right? And are taking care of one another in really beautiful ways that show us that we don't need to rely on the police or the criminal punishment system to take care of one another and support one another and to care for our neighbors and ourselves. And also programs where, I'm trying to think of where it was from. I think it was an NPR piece that we read around livable wages. I mean, what does it mean, for folks to have what they need in order to survive and thrive? But that's a scary concept for folks to think about. Well, what does it mean if we're giving folks this money and not others? And there's a lot there. So that's a really big question. But that the abolitionist in me is I think that's where my head goes first, thinking about a question like that.
Yeah, we're all really so deeply ingrained into the way things are in so many ways that it's hard to undo that. And I think we'll talk about that more actually next week.
Yes, we will.
Part of the book white property, black trespass.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, it's my turn to ask you one of these questions that I thought I was going to answer myself.
Correct. Yeah.
All right, so the first one I'm going to ask you is, what's one thing you think I can do? I was going to answer this as just, what's one thing you can do? So you can take it either way. To address racism at work.
One thing I can do is that, or
Yeah.
one thing I think you could do.
Yeah. I mean, either way. Interestingly enough, we both work at the same place, but in, different
places in the same
places
place.
in the same place. Yeah.
One thing I think I could do to address racism, I think that's such an ongoing work. Yeah, so there's different ways that I think I do that now, but I don't want to answer it with that. And now that I'm sort of thinking about this and speaking extemporaneously, there's also an element where I'm like, well, those are the things that that you're doing because you don't think about the things you don't do.
Ah, yeah. That's a really good point.
I'm having a moment like, well, yeah, you haven't thought about what you don't do because you're planning for the things that you do.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's hard to make space for that.
Yeah, and the creation of something new and different.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that, so there are ways that I think I'm doing that with colleagues.
Yeah.
And we're working through a book about whiteness in the workplace and how to decenter that.
Yep.
And so I think that's one element of the things that I'm doing. And also working with some folks to do some bigger workshops or dialogues with people and inviting people from across multiple departments together to discuss what the one we led was about inclusion and how do you feel included and what does it mean to feel included, and then how also can you then bring people into to feeling like they're welcome and that they belong in the workplace, and recognizing the influence of the power that we have individually to do that, but also recognizing how that it's not just individual, it's also like departmental, it's cultural, it's part of we contribute to it individually, but it's bigger than that too. So those are a couple things. I think I have a few ideas for things beyond what I'm currently doing, but they're not like coming to me right now to be able to speak cogently about them. But yeah, so those are a couple things that I'm doing now that I think are already planned or have already happened that will continue to do some of that work.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's real value in both of those things. Obviously, you and I have talked about both of those things that you're doing, and I love them, particularly the second example that you shared. I love the idea that it's beyond your home department, right? You all are expanding it and growing it, and that is only going to build folks' community at the place that we work at and give people comrades in this work. And so that I know that initiative started with the department that you're in and has grown. And I've really appreciated that.
It's been really fun to be a part of the way that it's developed and grown over the years.
Absolutely. And especially at the place that we work. And I think this happens at a lot of places of employment, we're siloed in a lot of ways, right? And so these opportunities to get out of your bubble and meet new people and then also do some really impactful work and difficult work and engage in dialogue is incredible. Yeah. I love that. Very good.
Oh, great.
Your turn.
It is my turn. So this is the question I think that feels very familiar and we might have talked about before, but we'll see how it goes. What do you understand about racial justice now that you didn't before? And so I'll frame before a little bit of meaning a few years ago, however you want to frame before. It could be before we did the podcast. It could be before you read something that you read recently, watched something or heard something. But so it could be about, what do you understand now that you didn't before you experienced X, and you could talk about that moment, or it could be more general and broad.
And it was racial justice.
Racial justice.
That's a huge question. And I don't recall it if you've asked it before. So that's a good thing. Or I was equally as shocked by the question and have put it in a place in my memory. I've probably, I've said this before, probably in like some of our year-end recap episodes. And obviously you and I talked about this offline, but one of the things I love about this podcast, and I actually probably haven't said this. One of the things I love about this podcast is that with lots of the media that we consume, not everything, but a lot of it, I find myself challenged by at least one thing in everything that we consume, whether it's a documentary or a book or a piece. And that takes a lot of different forms, right? Sometimes it's an intellectual new piece of history or knowledge that, our definition or a way of thinking that is new to me, or whoever has produced the piece has informed me in a new way of thinking about whatever that is. Sometimes I'm challenged in my own beliefs, right? About the identities I hold or what I'm coming to the table with and as in that moment. Sometimes I'm challenged when we watched some of those documentaries. I think about Black Boys a long time ago, or we just watched that found footage documentary about Philadelphia. Move. I mean, I'm challenged by the tragedies that we consume. And so I think in so many ways, everything that we read and consume on this podcast has opened my eyes and taught me things about racial justice that I'm so grateful for. And I think it's given me confidence to go out into the world and think about the ways in which I show up, the ways in which I show up at work, the ways in which I show up with my family and my friends, and am willing to engage in conversations about scary things. I mean, I think about a recent vacation that I took, and I was with a friend, and we were just talking about the concept of abolition, and she's not there yet. And, what do we do when these things happen, and why is this important? And, a lot of that conversation was really personal for me, and thinking about, we hold different identities, and talking about the ways in which the criminal punishment system and what's baked into our society, as you mentioned, targets me differently than it targets my friend. And so to be able to have some of that history and language and things to draw upon to help, I don't want to say educate, right? But to, be able to sort of say, here are some clear-cut examples, and here's what this could look like. It was really kind of a cool thing to be able to do in that moment on a vacation. And I don't know, before this podcast, you said, maybe something right before this podcast, like even before we started to have these conversations week in and week out, I might not have been able to do so cogently, or do so in a clear, not get angry or upset. Right. So yeah, I'm really grateful for this podcast and our conversations and our work to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways that we've gained a lot of language around how to approach these challenging concepts and I mean challenging in the way that it challenges social norms.
Yes,
it challenges
absolutely.
the status quo, and that's what I mean by challenging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very good. All right, this question that I have for you, and not me, is can't let that go.
4 questions for you today. I guess.
Who do you most want to have a conversation about racism with, and why?
That's a fascinating question.
Isn't it though?
Yeah, because my initial thought goes to, who do I want to learn from?
Yes.
And then my next thought goes to, who do I have influence with to be able to speak to them?
Yes.
Maybe differently than we have before. Who maybe has some, like, I have influence with them and they have influence over something.
Yes. Yes.
It's a little bit big,
Oh,
right? Like
yeah.
what power do they have access to?
Absolutely.
And I'm coming up blank on all of it. These are the directions that I'm going as I think about it. Does it say if they have to be alive?
It doesn't.
No? Okay. That feels like cheating. Yeah.
When I thought about this answer, I did think of someone who is gone, who you and I maybe have consumed on this podcast.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of Edward Said.
Okay.
And the work he did on, his book was called On Orientalism. and the ways that he talked about anti-Arab racism and Islamophobia
Yes.
in a particular way. So he's been gone for a bit now.
Yeah.
But that I think would be a great conversation to have, because I think that would be a conversation where I would enter in as a student,
Yes,
so to speak.
absolutely. That's wonderful.
So Edward Said is a name that comes to mind. And then there are some folks who I'd love to have conversations with now about Palestine, and whose names I'm currently blanking on. So, yeah, if I had a moment to
But
look
at least,
up some,
but
yeah,
that train of thoughts, right, or that topic would be.
I mean, Mehdi Sabah,
Yeah.
who edited the book we read, Their Borders Our World,
Mm-hmm.
would be a great person to talk to. Yeah, so there are folks who I think are who are Palestinian. I'd
Yes.
love to talk to them. William C. Johnson comes to mind.
Oh,
Is that the correct name? He wrote No Nation
no map.
on the Map. Yeah,
Yeah.
on No Map. That's his name. Johnson?
Anderson.
William
Anderson.
C. Anderson.
There it is.
I was like, Johnson doesn't sound right. William C. Anderson, I think, would be great to talk to, and the way that he sees sort of Black anarchism.
Yes.
Love to learn more directly from him. I think there's lots of folks who I'd love to talk to
Absolutely.
and be like a sponge.
Yes.
Be the student in.
Yeah.
I think about the who do I have influence with? I don't know. There's people interpersonally who I think would be interesting to talk to. There's some family members I'm thinking about. I don't know that I want to name them right now.
Yes. Yeah.
And broadcast that out. But there's some folks that I think about that way. I think about who do I have influence with who's like has a bigger connection to things. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there are people who work at our place of work
Yeah.
to who I have borderline access to, who might
Yes.
be interesting to have a conversation with and nudge them along
Right.
a
In the-
path.
Yeah. In the work that we do and maybe
Yeah.
policy and yeah.
But yeah, I don't. Those are the people I'm thinking of that
I
come
love
to
that.
mind as
I
I
love
think
that.
about who I want to have a conversation with.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me stumble through that question. I was
Yeah,
like, I don't
no,
know. There's
that's
so
good.
many people to.
Yes.
So many people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Well, those are the questions.
Those are the questions.
Yeah, we
did it.
asked all 4,
Wow. Just like that.
just like that.
Very good. Good conversation, my friend.
Yes, thank you. I'm
All
glad we
right.
could do this again.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
It's a good activity to do.
Yes. All right. Well, you're up next time officially. Again. Officially. What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
Well, as I mentioned earlier and last week, I'm bringing the October book to the table, White Property, Black Trespass, Racial Capitalism, and the Religious Function of Mass Incarceration. We've both finished reading it,
Yes.
but we finished reading it too close to recording time to be
Yes.
able to put together some cogent thoughts on it.
And we had
to
some
talk about it.
We had some other things to do.
Other life things came up
Yes.
that delayed the discussion to next week.
Yes.
But it does really dive into how religion shaped the creation of white supremacy and reinforces it, and how it's had an influence on our carceral thinking and the police and prisons, and the way that police serve as a salvific force, saving us from danger, from evil, and how it's framed in that way, and gets into the concept of like the thin blue line and all of this stuff, and
Yes.
how we could slip into chaos. And there's a lot of influential texts from a long time ago that you see patterns of in more modern writings about broken windows policing
Yes.
and things. And it's very fascinating to see the way that religion, specifically Christianity, and then specifically like a form of Protestantism, really shaped a lot about, because Protestantism has been the dominant religion in the United States. Really, not to excuse the influence of other religions on
course.
this, on
Yes.
white supremacy and on policing and on prisons, but Protestantism has a lot of influence. That's also what he's talking about most. So
Yes.
yeah, great book. Looking forward to talking about it more next week and getting into some of the histories of it that he talks about. Andrew Crinks is the author, and yeah, so we'll talk about that next week right here because we will be prepared next week.
We sure will. And what's awesome is that this is our October book and it will still be October. So we won't get behind and we can still figure out. I guess we got to figure out a November book.
It's your turn. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, folks. See right there.
We're going to talk about it in just a minute.
Yes, we sure are. Well, but yes, I'm very excited to talk about white property, black trespass here next week. Yeah. All right. With that, we want to thank you for joining us today for this very special episode. You know what we want you to do, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life, follow us on social media, including Instagram and TikTok. Check us out over on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.